The white pharmacy bag was already gone. Raymond Caldwell stood on the sun-cracked sidewalk in North Tulsa, 75 years old, one hand braced against a parking meter to keep his right knee from folding under him, watching a man in a grey hoodie turn a corner 40 yards ahead without looking back. The bag swung from the alarm on Raymond Caldwell's phone went off at 6:45, same as it had every morning for the past 11 years. Not because he needed reminding to wake up. At 75, his body had long since abandoned the luxury of sleeping in, but because it reminded him to check on Brenda before he did anything else. He sat up slowly, working through the familiar inventory of complaints his body lodged every single morning. His knees ached with a low, grinding persistence that no amount of ibuprofen ever fully quieted. His lower back tightened like a cable under tension when he first stood. These were the receipts of 41 years working for the railroad, 37 of them out of the North Tulsa yard, hauling, lifting, bending, enduring Oklahoma heat that could crack asphalt in July. He had no bitterness about it. Work was work, and he had done his. He padded down the narrow hallway of the house on North Peoria in his slippers, the worn floorboards whispering under him, and pushed open the bedroom door to check on Brenda. She was still asleep, her silver hair fanned across the pillow, her breathing slow and regular. He watched her chest rise and fall for a moment before pulling the door gently shut. That was the first thing he did every morning. He had been doing it for 2 years now, ever since the cardiologist at St. Francis had sat them both down and explained what the words dilated cardiomyopathy meant for the rest of their lives. What they meant in practical terms was metoprolol. 50 milligrams, twice a day, morning and evening, without fail. The medication kept Brenda's heart rate regulated, reduced the strain on a muscle that had quietly grown too large for the work it was being asked to do. Miss a dose, the doctor had said, and her heart rate could spike unpredictably. Miss 2, and you could be looking at an emergency. The prescription had become the fixed point around which their entire daily life orbited. Raymond made coffee, standing at the kitchen window and watching the neighborhood come awake in the early light. North Tulsa was an honest part of the city, not pretty, not prosperous, but real in the way that only places where working people actually live manage to be. A man walked his dog past the chain-link fence across the street. A school bus lumbered around the corner 2 blocks south. Raymond drank his coffee and felt the morning settle around him. He checked the orange prescription bottle on the kitchen counter, 2 pills left. Brenda's morning dose was one of them, which he set beside her glass of water on the nightstand before she woke. That left one, her evening dose. He had called in the refill 3 days ago, and Carl Norris over at Midtown Pharmacy had confirmed it was ready. The regular pharmacy, a chain location on North Cincinnati, had closed its doors 8 months back. Raymond had transferred Brenda's prescriptions to Carl's Place, a family-run drugstore that had been on that same block since 1978. Carl knew his customers by name and kept their files organized in a system that only he fully understood, and he always had the prescription waiting in a labeled bag behind the counter. Raymond left the house at 9:15, walking the 6 blocks to where his car was parked on the street. The driveway had a cracked concrete issue he kept meaning to get fixed, and drove the 12 minutes to the pharmacy. Carl had the bag waiting just as promised. Raymond paid cash, the way he always did since dropping his supplemental insurance coverage to manage the household budget, and tucked the white paper bag under his arm. 2 weeks' supply. 14 mornings and 14 evenings of certainty. He decided to stop at the convenience store on the way back to pick up a newspaper and a carton of milk, the kind of small errand that gave shape to a retired man's morning. The store was a squat brick building with a hand-painted sign and a half-broken bell above the door. Raymond parked, went inside, grabbed the milk from the back cooler, found the last copy of the Tulsa World on the rack, and brought both to the counter. He set the pharmacy bag on the countertop while he dug in his front pocket for his wallet. He was counting out bills when he heard the door slam behind him. He didn't think anything of it. Not at first. It was only when he turned to leave, tucking his change into his pocket, that he realized the white paper bag was gone. He looked at the countertop. Blank. He looked at his hands. Just the newspaper and the milk. He looked at the young man behind the register, a teenager who hadn't looked up from his phone the entire transaction, who only now raised his eyes with a vague expression. "Did you see?" Raymond started. "Guy grabbed it when he walked past," the teenager said. He pointed at the door. "Went that way." Raymond pushed through the door fast enough that the broken bell rattled above him. He stood on the sidewalk and looked up and down the block. To his left, maybe 40 yards ahead, a man in a grey hoodie was walking fast, not quite running, the white paper bag swinging from one hand. Raymond recognized him in the way you recognize certain neighborhood figures without exactly knowing them. A younger man, maybe mid-30s, with a particular lean to his walk that suggested someone always calculating the angle of exit. "Hey!" Raymond called out. His voice was steady but not loud enough. "Hey, that's not yours." The man glanced back once over his shoulder, not even enough of a look to register concern, and turned the corner onto the side street. Raymond tried to follow. His knees had other plans. He made it perhaps 15 steps before the right one buckled just enough to make him grab the nearest parking meter to keep from going down completely. He stood there, breathing, one hand on the cold metal post, watching the corner where the man had disappeared. The pharmacy bag was gone. Brenda's last pill, her evening dose, was on the nightstand. Beyond that, nothing. Her next refill dose was due in 3 hours. Raymond stood on the sidewalk in the Oklahoma morning sun, 75 years old, his knees on fire, his mind running the calculation over and over, and came up with the same answer every time. He had to find a way to fix this, right now. He tried the pharmacy first, calling Carl Norris from the sidewalk on his cell phone, thumbing through his contacts with hands that had developed a faint tremor in the past year. Carl picked up on the third ring, and Raymond explained what had happened in as few words as possible. Carl was sympathetic, genuinely so, in the way of a man who had watched this neighborhood age around him for decades. But his hands were tied on the insurance side, and Raymond had been paying cash. An emergency replacement would cost Raymond another $64 out of pocket, and Carl could have it ready within the hour if Raymond came back in. Raymond had $41 in his wallet. He did the math twice, standing on the sidewalk in the heat that was already building past 80 degrees by 9:30. He could drive home, find his emergency cash from the kitchen drawer. He kept a small amount there for exactly these kinds of situations. But between gas and the cash on hand, he'd still come up short. His bank card was in the house, sitting on the dresser where he'd left it the night before, a thing he did sometimes when his hands were full, coming in from the car. He drove partway toward the replacement pharmacy on Admiral Place that Carl had suggested as an alternative, a smaller outfit that might work with him on the cost, before his right knee locked up so badly while pressing the gas pedal that he had to pull over. He sat in the car for 3 minutes, pressing his palm into the joint until the spasm passed. Then he drove another 4 blocks before the knee seized again. He pulled into the lot of a bar called Crossroads, a low-slung building with a gravel lot and a hand-painted sign that had been there as long as Raymond could remember. He parked, got out carefully, and lowered himself onto a wooden bench near the entrance that someone had set out under the thin shade of a hackberry tree. His knee was screaming now, a grinding heat that ran from the cap down into the shin. He had no clear plan. He needed $64 he didn't have on him, and his legs wouldn't carry him the additional 8 blocks to the pharmacy anyway. He could call someone, but his daughter was in Bartlesville, 45 minutes out. His neighbor Martin was at work. He sat on the bench and turned the problem over in his mind, the way he'd learned to turn problems over during 41 years of railroad work. Methodically, without panic, looking for the load-bearing point. That was when he heard them. The sound came first, as it always does, a deep rhythmic thunder rolling in off the street, growing until it filled the air and vibrated in his sternum. He looked up to see a line of motorcycles turning into the lot. Not 2 or 3, many. He counted without meaning to, 10 bikes, all of them heavy iron machines, chrome catching the morning light. The riders cut their engines in sequence, and the sudden comparative quiet was almost startling. Raymond had grown up hearing stories about motorcycle clubs. Most men his age had. The Hells Angels in particular occupied a specific space in the American imagination, one built from decades of news coverage and cultural mythology, very little of it generous. He felt his body go rigid on the bench, a reflexive animal response he was not proud of but could not fully suppress. He watched them dismount. They were large men mostly, wearing the kind of road-worn leather that comes from actual miles rather than a showroom. The patches on their backs were unmistakable. The red and white, the winged skull, the bottom rocker that said Oklahoma. They moved with the comfortable ease of men who had been riding together long enough that they didn't need to talk much to communicate. Raymond looked down at his hands, then back at the pharmacy directions on his phone screen, then at the group. He thought about Brenda's heart. He thought about the cardiologist's voice, measured and clinical, explaining what an unregulated heart rate could do over the course of hours. He looked at the man sitting alone on the wooden steps at the side of the bar entrance. This one hadn't gone inside with the others. He was sitting on the top step, forearms resting on his knees, looking at his phone with an expression of mild concentration. He was large, well over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, with a dark beard trimmed close and arms that were covered from wrist to elbow in ink. The patches were on his jacket. He was part of them, no question. But he was also just a man, sitting on some steps not 20 feet away. Raymond sat on the bench for a full 2 minutes. Then he stood up, locked his right knee deliberately to keep it from buckling, and walked over. "Excuse me," he said. The man looked up. His eyes were dark, very still, the kind of eyes that didn't give a lot away on first inspection. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. He just looked at Raymond, with a directness that was neither hostile nor welcoming, simply attentive. "I'm sorry to bother you," Raymond said. He heard how his own voice sounded, thin and slightly rough, an old man's voice. "My name is Raymond Caldwell. I live over on North Peoria. I don't want anything from you except maybe 10 minutes of your time." The man on the steps studied him for a moment. "Cole," he said, just the one word. He tilted his head slightly toward the space on the step below him. "Sit down before that knee goes out completely." Raymond blinked, then he sat. He told Cole Merritt the whole thing in plain sequence, the way he'd always made his reports at the railroad. No editorializing, just facts in order. The prescription. The convenience store. The man in the grey hoodie who had taken the bag. The $64 he needed and didn't have on him. Brenda's condition. The timeline. Cole listened without interrupting once. Near the end, Raymond noticed that Dale Hutchins, a thicker man in his early 50s with a greying beard and chapter president patches, had drifted to the edge of the lot and was watching the two of them from a distance, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Raymond finished talking and waited. Cole Merritt looked at him for a long moment, then looked down at his boots, then back up. "This man who took it," Cole said. "You said you know his face." "I'd know him again," Raymond said. "Yes." Cole nodded slowly, as though a decision had just been filed somewhere internal. "Okay," he said. Raymond wasn't sure what he had expected the word okay to produce. Perhaps an offer to loan him the $64. Perhaps a polite dismissal. What he did not expect was for Cole Merritt to stand up, walk to Dale Hutchins, and have a conversation that lasted less than 90 seconds, after which Dale looked across the lot at Raymond with an expression that Raymond could only describe as appraising. Then Dale nodded. Cole came back to the steps. "Tell me everything you can about the man who took the bag." Everything. Raymond described Roy Spence in the careful, methodical way of a man trained to notice and report. The grey hoodie, the particular lean to his walk, the age, mid-30s, maybe younger, the direction he'd gone when he turned the corner, and the fact that Raymond had seen him before in this neighborhood, loitering near the convenience store on multiple occasions, always with the posture of someone who was waiting for an opportunity rather than anything in particular. Cole absorbed this and walked back to the group. Raymond watched from the bench as the men gathered in a loose circle, and he observed something that surprised him. The conversation was quiet. Not the loud, performative aggression he had been braced for, but a series of short, practical exchanges, men pooling local knowledge, the way any group of people who know a neighborhood will do when the question is specific enough. Several of them had their phones out. One man, young, maybe late 20s, with a red bandana folded into his jacket pocket, said something and pointed east toward Admiral Place. Raymond realized that in his mind he had already assigned this group a single identity, a monolithic thing composed of everything he'd ever heard or read or assumed. He was now watching 10 separate people think. Cole came back a third time and crouched down in front of the bench so that his eyes were level with Raymond's. "Travis thinks he knows where this guy operates out of," Cole said. "There's an abandoned loading dock off Admiral, east of the rail yard. Young guy, grey hoodie, picks up and moves product in that area. Description matches." "Product," Raymond repeated. "He's a small-time dealer," Cole said. He said it without judgment, just information. "The kind who diversifies when he sees an opportunity. Your bag, he probably thought it was something else, or figured he could sell whatever was in it." Raymond processed this. It made a grim kind of sense. "I'm going to be straight with you," Cole said. "We're going to go find him and get your wife's medication back. Nobody's going to get hurt. But I want you to understand what you're agreeing to here, because you'd be coming with us." "Coming with you," Raymond said, "so you can identify him. Positive ID before anything happens. We don't grab the wrong man." Cole's voice was flat and reasonable. "You don't have to." "We can give you the money for the replacement instead." "No," Raymond said. He was surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "He took it from me. I want it back." Something shifted very slightly in Cole's expression. Not quite a smile, more like a recognition. "All right," Cole said. He stood. "You'll ride with me." Raymond looked at the row of motorcycles and felt the particular sensation of a man who has arrived at a point where pride and necessity have exactly the same solution. "I haven't been on a motorcycle since 1987, he said. "It'll come back," Cole said. As they prepared to leave, Raymond found himself watching the men more closely, the studied wariness of his first reaction gradually making room for something more complicated. They moved efficiently and without drama. Travis Webb, the young one with the bandana, checked his phone one more time and relayed something to Dale, who made a hand signal that seemed to organize the group's direction without a word being spoken. These were men who had developed a shared language over years of riding together, and whatever Raymond had projected onto that language when he first saw it, it was not what he was seeing now. Cole brought him a helmet. Where it came from, Raymond didn't ask, and helped him figure out how to grip the rear handlebars before Cole swung onto the bike in front of him. Raymond climbed on carefully, his right knee complaining the whole way. "Lean with me. Not against me," Cole said, "and don't grab my jacket unless you're about to fall." "Understood," Raymond said. They pulled out of the lot in a formation that was more organized than Raymond had anticipated, Dale at the front, the group spreading across the lane in a staggered pattern that he distantly understood was a safety formation. The sound of the engines was immense at close range. It moved through his ribcage and into his spine, but there was something almost meditative about it once they were moving. The city slid past on both sides, North Tulsa's flat, sun-baked streetscape opening up around them. Cole had said, somewhere in the process of organizing, that his father had died at 59. He said it quietly, not as a speech, just as a fact that emerged when Raymond had asked, in a brief moment when they were both waiting by the bikes, whether Cole had family nearby. "My dad died without his heart medication," Cole said. "Insurance company denied the appeal twice. He was 59. He paused. "So no, I don't have a lot of patience for people who mess around with what keeps somebody's heart running." Raymond had looked at him for a moment, not sure what to say. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Cole had shrugged, not dismissively, but with the practiced containment of a man who has made peace with something that will never fully stop hurting. "Long time ago," he said. "Let's go get your wife's medication." It was, Raymond thought, the most clarifying thing anyone had said to him all morning. The abandoned loading dock sat behind a line of corrugated metal warehouses on the eastern edge of Admiral Place, in a part of the city where the streets went wide and the buildings went low and you could hear the distant clatter of the rail yard on a quiet day. Raymond had worked near here for decades and had never paid much attention to the empty spaces between the active ones. They had always just been the margins of the working world, the places where useful things used to happen before economics moved them somewhere cheaper. Today, the margins mattered. Travis Webb had gotten the location from someone in his phone contacts, Raymond didn't ask who, and confirmed it with a second call during the ride over. The dock was accessible from a narrow side street that dead-ended at a rusted chain-link gate, the gate itself hanging open on one broken hinge. Beyond it, a cracked concrete pad extended between two long warehouse walls, creating a natural enclosure roughly the size of a basketball court. One way in, one way out. Dale brought the group to a stop half a block from the entrance, and Cole pulled alongside him. Raymond could see into the dock from where they idled, could see, even at this distance, the grey hoodie. Roy Spence was sitting on an overturned plastic crate at the far end of the concrete pad, talking to someone on his phone, his legs stretched out in front of him, with the casual ease of a man who believes himself entirely unobserved. The white pharmacy bag was on the ground beside him, leaning against the crate like it was nothing. Raymond felt a heat move through him that had nothing to do with the Oklahoma sun. "That's him," he said to Cole. "Grey hoodie, that's the bag." Cole looked, nodded, relayed the confirmation to Dale with a glance and a single gesture. What happened next was not loud. That was the thing Raymond would think about later, would keep returning to in his memory, how quiet it was. No shouting, no revving of engines for effect, no theatrical display of menace. Dale simply pulled forward and turned through the broken gate and into the loading dock at a steady, unhurried pace, and the 9 bikes behind him followed in sequence, spreading out as they came through the entrance and fanning into a loose arc across the width of the concrete pad. By the time Roy Spence registered what was happening and got to his feet, all 10 motorcycles were positioned between him and the only exit. They idled in a line, engines muttering at low throttle, chrome catching the noonlight off the warehouse walls. 10 riders, none of them moving, just sitting there, engines running, watching him. Roy's phone call ended, one way or another. Raymond watched from the back of Cole's bike as Roy looked at the line of motorcycles, then at the walls on either side of him, then back at the line. Raymond could read the calculation happening in real time on the younger man's face. The exits assessed and found blocked, the distances measured and found insufficient, the options considered and found severely limited. Roy Spence was 34 years old and reasonably street-savvy, and he had just done the math correctly. Dale Hutchins cut his engine. In the sudden relative quiet, his voice carried clearly across the concrete. "You took something this morning that doesn't belong to you," Dale said. He wasn't yelling. His voice was the voice of a man making a statement of fact that he has no particular emotional investment in. "White pharmacy bag, from an old man at a convenience store on North Cincinnati." Roy said nothing. His jaw was tight. "We just want the bag back," Dale said. "That's the whole thing. The bag comes back, we leave. Nothing else." Roy's eyes moved along the line of bikes again. He was looking for the weak point, Raymond could tell. He was the kind of young man who had spent enough time in difficult situations to know how to look for the exit, and he was not finding one. Cole stepped off his bike and stood beside it. He didn't walk forward. He just stood, which somehow made things more serious rather than less. "My wife needs that medication," Raymond said. He hadn't planned to speak. His voice came out louder than he expected, amplified slightly by the warehouse walls on both sides. "She's 71 years old. She has a heart condition. Whatever you thought was in that bag, it's not worth a damn thing to you." Roy looked at Raymond then. Actually looked at him, the way he hadn't bothered to look when he'd snatched the bag at the store. Something in his expression shifted. Not remorse, exactly. Roy Spence did not look like a man who carried a great deal of remorse as standard equipment, but something more, like recalibration. Like the picture had changed enough that he was processing a new version of events. He reached down, picked up the white paper bag by the handles, and held it out at arm's length. Travis Webb rode forward, took it, and brought it back to Raymond. Raymond opened the bag with hands that were not entirely steady. The prescription bottles were inside, both of them intact and sealed, with Carl Norris's neat pharmacy label on each one. He sat with the bag in his hands and breathed for a moment. "Check it," Cole said quietly. Not a question. Raymond checked it. Everything was there. He looked up and across the concrete at Roy Spence, who was standing with his hands at his sides, watching with the expression of a man who has decided that cutting his losses was the only available form of dignity. Raymond didn't say anything more to him. There was nothing to say that would improve the situation for either of them. He closed the bag and held it in his lap. Dale nodded once at no one in particular, started his engine, and began to turn his bike toward the exit. The others followed in the same quiet, organized sequence they'd arrived in. Travis fell in line. Roy Spence stood on the concrete and watched them go. Raymond thought, as Cole pulled out of the loading dock and back onto the side street, that he had spent a great many years believing he understood what different kinds of people were for. The railroad had given him categories: supervisors, workers, officemen, yardmen, and the neighborhood had given him others, and the news had given him still more. He was not foolish enough to think that 10 minutes in a loading dock had dissolved everything he'd ever assumed. But he was honest enough to recognize that something had been adjusted today. Some measurement had come out different from the one he'd always taken for granted. The sun was directly overhead. The engines spoke their low, rolling thunder as the group moved east on Admiral and then turned north, back toward the bar where the morning had started. Raymond held the pharmacy bag against his chest with both arms, the way he might hold something irreplaceable, which it was. He thought about Brenda at the kitchen table, waiting. They rode back in the same formation, though the urgency had loosened now into something more like simple forward motion. The city looked the same as it always did at midday, flat and bright and unhurried, the particular bleached quality of Tulsa light in summer sitting on every surface and making the familiar streets look slightly like photographs of themselves. Raymond watched it pass from the back of Cole's bike and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. The ordinary, uncomplicated relief of a man who has solved the problem in front of him and can now see the next thing clearly. They stopped back at the crossroads lot so Raymond could pick up his car. The group dismounted, and there was a brief exchange between Dale and Cole that Raymond wasn't close enough to hear. Dale looked at Raymond once, gave a slow nod, not warm exactly, but something in the direction of acknowledgement, and went inside the bar with most of the others. Cole stayed. "I'll follow you," Cole said. "Make sure you get home all right with that knee." Raymond looked at him. He was about to say that wasn't necessary, which would have been both true and ungrateful, so instead he said, "I appreciate that." He drove the 12 minutes back to North Peoria carefully, watching in the rearview mirror as Cole's bike followed at a steady distance, close enough to be present, but not so close as to crowd. There was something almost formal about it, like an escort. Raymond thought about the word and decided it was the right one. He pulled into the space in front of the house and turned off the engine and sat for a moment. Then he picked up the pharmacy bag and got out. Cole parked at the curb, cut his engine, and swung off the bike with the easy motion of a man who had done it thousands of times. He stood on the sidewalk while Raymond went up the porch steps, Raymond's right knee burning steadily now, in the way it did when he'd asked too much of it in too short a time. The front door opened before Raymond reached it. Brenda Caldwell stood in the doorway in her house robe, silver hair loose around her face, 71 years old and sharp-eyed in the way of a woman who has spent decades paying close attention to the world around her. She looked at Raymond first, scanning him in the practiced, immediate way of a wife who is checking her husband for damage. And then her eyes went to Cole Merritt, standing on the sidewalk beside the motorcycle, 6 feet 3 inches of tattooed biker in full leather and patches, looking back at her from the street. Brenda looked at Cole. She looked at Raymond. She looked at the pharmacy bag in Raymond's hand. "Come up on the porch," she said to Cole. Her voice was quiet and decided, the voice of a woman extending hospitality on her own terms. "I'll get some water." Cole glanced at Raymond, who gave him a small nod, and Cole came up the porch steps. Raymond handed Brenda the pharmacy bag and watched her look inside it with the same careful checking he had done in the loading dock. She closed it, held it for a moment, and then looked up at Cole with an expression that Raymond recognized. It was the look she got when she was composing the accurate version of her feelings rather than the easy version. "Thank you," she said. Not elaborately, just the 2 words, with the full weight of what they covered. "Yes, ma'am," Cole said. He sat in the older of the 2 porch chairs because Raymond gestured to it, and he sat carefully, the chair being the kind that tested the confidence of large men. Brenda brought out 2 glasses of water and went back inside to take her midday dose. Through the window, Raymond could see her moving in the kitchen with the deliberate calm of a woman who has been frightened and will not say so. Raymond sat in the other chair and handed Cole one of the glasses. They sat for a moment in the way that men sometimes sit after a difficult morning, not quite at rest, but no longer in motion. "Can I ask you something?" Raymond said. "Go ahead." "When I walked up to you at that bar, before I said a word." Raymond paused, measuring his phrasing. "I want you to know that I was afraid of you, not of you specifically, of what I thought I was looking at." Cole held the glass of water in both hands and looked out at the street. A car passed. A dog barked 1 block over and stopped. "Most people think the same thing," he said. It came out without bitterness, without performance, just a fact he had lived with long enough to be at peace with. "I know that's not an excuse," Raymond said. "No," Cole agreed, "but it's honest. I can work with honest." Raymond looked at him. "Your father," he said. "I'm sorry again. That's a hard thing to carry." Cole's jaw moved slightly. He was a good man. Worked construction his whole life, paid into a system his whole life, and at the end, the system told him the medication that would have kept him here another 20 years cost too much to justify. He said it evenly, without inflection, and Raymond heard in that evenness the enormous effort of containment it represented. "That's the part I never worked out how to put down." "I don't think you're supposed to put that down," Raymond said. Cole considered this. "Maybe not," he said. They sat a while longer. Down the block, Raymond could hear the motorcycles starting up one by one, the sound building and then evening out as the group organized itself for the road. He didn't stand to look, but he could track it by ear, the rolling, overlapping thunder of the engines finding their rhythm. Cole stood when the sound reached its full volume, set the empty glass on the porch railing, and looked at Raymond for a moment with those still dark eyes. "You've got a good wife," he said. 49 years, Raymond said. "I know it." Cole nodded. He went down the porch steps and walked to his bike. He pulled on his helmet with the practiced motion of a man comfortable in his own life, whatever other people thought of it, and swung onto the machine and started it up. He raised one hand, not quite a wave, more of an acknowledgement, and pulled away from the curb. The line of motorcycles moved past the house on North Peoria one by one, that great rolling sound passing through the air and the walls and Raymond's chest before diminishing down the street and around the corner until it was only the suggestion of itself, and then nothing. Raymond sat on the porch for another minute. The neighborhood had returned to its ordinary midday quiet. The dog had stopped barking, the street was empty, a pair of sparrows were negotiating something in the hackberry tree across the fence. He went inside. Brenda was at the kitchen table with her glass of water and the small plastic organizer where she kept the week's doses sorted into their labeled compartments. She had already taken the midday dose, the compartment closed. She looked up when he came in. Raymond pulled out his chair and sat across from her. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it, from the convenience store to the loading dock to the porch. He told it in sequence, the way he had always told her things, without editorializing, just the facts arranged in order. She listened without interrupting, the way she had always listened in 49 years of marriage, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her eyes on his face. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You rode on a motorcycle," she said. "I did. At 75. My knee is going to remind me about that for a week," he said. She pressed her lips together in the expression that was the nearest she usually came to, smiling at his discomfort. Then her face went serious again, but not unhappy, thoughtful, the way she got when she was revising something she had believed. Raymond reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Her hand was warm and familiar, the bones of it visible beneath the skin, now in a way they hadn't been 20 years ago. He thought about Cole's father, 59 years old, and the system that had weighed his life against a number and found it insufficient. He thought about Roy Spence standing on the concrete of an abandoned loading dock, holding out a white bag, recalibrating his picture of the morning. He thought about Dale Hutchins's slow nod and Travis Webb's phone call, and the way 10 motorcycles had moved through an entrance and spread out in silence, with no performance and no waste. He thought about how the world was full of people he had sorted into categories without consulting them first. Brenda turned her hand over, under his, and held it. "I'm glad you're home," she said. "Me too," Raymond said. The kitchen was quiet around them. The afternoon light came through the window over the sink and lay across the floor in a warm, long rectangle. Outside, somewhere a few blocks away, the last faint echo of the motorcycles had dissolved entirely into the ordinary noise of the city. Brenda's medication was in its organizer. Today's dose is taken, tomorrow's waiting. Raymond's knee throbbed steadily beneath the table. The coffee he'd made that morning was cold on the counter. The newspaper he'd bought was still in the car. None of it mattered particularly. He sat at the kitchen table with his wife's hand in his and let the ordinary afternoons settle around them like something earned.